Brown.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and thank you very much for your statement, Leader of the House. I certainly welcome the work being done to encourage girls to enter non-traditional professions, to study STEM subjects and to tackle gender inequality and stereotyping. I note the STEM Cymru 2 scheme and would like to ask, out of the 3,000 young women who have engaged with the scheme, how many of those have gone on to a career in engineering? I really do welcome these efforts, but girls need to have the confidence in maths before they can excel at subjects such as physics. And it's essential that we get the basics right. The more girls who leave primary school and enter secondary school confident in their ability to do maths, the more who are encouraged to think about studying for STEM subjects and to go on to study STEM subjects, the more women will find in engineering and the scientific professions. So I would be really interested to know how you're monitoring the effectiveness of the programmes that you've introduced. I think, potentially they're very good programmes, but, we need to know how effective they're being, and hopefully, that there'll be some very good news there. What worries me, and I'm sure you're also concerned about this, is that it's been more than 40 years since the advent of the Equal Pay Act, and women are still earning 80% of men's pay. Roughly about 20 years ago, women were earning 75% of male earnings, which means that, the narrowing of the gap by 5% over 20 years is progress of sorts. But at this rate, it's going to take another 80 years to eliminate the gender pay gap. Welsh public sector could lead the way here and empower working women in the public sector by introducing pay transparency. So I'd be interested to know what your thoughts are about that. I welcome the programmes that the Welsh Government have set in place to tackle gender stereotyping, but I'd suggest that gender stereotyping needs to be tackled much earlier, and I think you probably agree with me there. Girls and boys absorb gender norms along with all the other norms and values they learn from the people around them, and this process begins at birth. So how are staff in nurseries and infant schools, as well as adults working with older children, being trained to spot gender stereotyping and how to avoid it? I welcome the efforts made by the Welsh Government to tackle domestic violence, and the training of professionals is a very good move. Can the Leader of the House give us an update on the progress of those schemes in due course? I realise that you wouldn't be able to give a detailed update now. But coming on to another big issue, no practice exemplifies the subordination and abuse of women more than FGM. And yet there have been no meaningful prosecutions. So can the Leader of the House please tell me what Welsh Government's policy is regarding referring cases of FGM for investigation by the police? And can she also tell us what Welsh Government is doing to directly challenge the patriarchal cultures of the communities in which FGM occurs and which results in FGM? Thank you.
Leader of the House.
Yes, the member makes a very important point. That last point in particular is a really important point. We have been working extremely hard with, in a range of areas to make sure that reporting and prosecution takes place. They tend to be very complex cases to prosecute, and actually prevention is better than prosecution anyway. So we've been rolling out our training across all professionals who have contact with young girls, particularly young girls who are in the at-risk category, so just before puberty, to spot the signs of a young girl that's at risk and start the protection programme as early as possible. But also, we've been working very carefully with the criminal justice authorities across the UK to make sure that we have the right training in place so that the police and the first responders also pick up the right signs, and also that we work inside the communities so that the communities themselves start to self-police. So it's hugely complicated, but we will be seeing some more prosecutions shortly. But I don't think it is just about the prosecution. It's much more about changing the culture, as you say, the patriarchal culture in some of those. Although actually large numbers of the women of the cultures it's the women themselves who are actually involved in it. So there's a huge cultural issue here that we have to be very cognizant of, and we have to work very hard to change. And that's partly why we're having the whole society approach to the gender stereotyping issue, because that's the fundamental basis of this. In terms of some of the specifics that you asked me about, in terms of physics, for example, one of the things, one of the contributors to the Valfeld plaque unveiling that we had just outside the Senedd now said something that really resonated with me. She said she was looking forward to the day when somebody addressed a young woman about her figures, and what they meant was her contribution in maths to scientific advancement, and not what she looked like without her clothes on. And I too would second that. I hope we've all seen the film Hidden Figures, which was a very good demonstration of the contribution that women have made throughout scientific history, which is then hidden over completely. And I will have to say that I was completely unaware of the contribution of the black women on the space programme until I'd read the book and seen the film. And that's what the unveiling of that plaque was about. It's about making sure that young women across Wales understand the contribution that women have made in those fields and therefore aspire to that contribution themselves. Because if you haven't seen it, how can you aspire to be it? So I think the plaque was a very good first step. My next step, Deputy Presiding Officer, is to make sure that we have one of those QR codes on the bottom of it, so that when you put your phone up to it, it gives you a biography of the woman being honoured in that way, so that young women across Wales can have the positive role models that will make them succeed. But in terms of how we'll know we're succeeding, when the number of women in Wales goes above 20% taking A-level physics, that would be a very standard place. That hasn't moved for 40 years. So I'm very much hoping that in the next 5, the measures we're putting in place now will move that.
Okay, thank you. We have 9 minutes left on this statement to run, and we have 5 speakers, so I shall leave you